Well, that's interesting. You asked that. I've done cocaine in the state courthouse bathroom. I've done cocaine in the federal courthouse bathroom. I've shown up to hearings hungover, and it was not unusual for me to have a panic attack on the way to a courthouse. I remember I had a bench trial. I pulled over and snorted cocaine off the back of my hand.
Welcome to The Defense Never Rests with Morgan and Akins, your monthly dose of uncommon sense about all things legal and some that are not.
Hey, everybody. This is Trisha Baxter. Welcome to The Defense Never Rest. Today, we are talking addiction, all kinds of addiction, alcohol, drugs. We're also talking anxiety, depression. It is something that hits our profession profoundly, as I'm sure it does most professions, but we're going to talk about in the context of lawyers today. Before I get started, I just want to say that if you like what we're doing, I appreciate you subscribing to our podcast channel, giving us a comment, a like, a review. We also are on YouTube, The Legal Navigator. Check us out there. So chances are, as lawyers, maybe even claims adjusters, vice president of claims, risk managers, you are working alongside with somebody who has an addiction problem, maybe an eating disorder problem, or anxiety and depression. And maybe you know it or maybe you don't. And that's what this episode is about. It is really to try to figure out, to help people that are going through that and to figure out how you can respond, if at all. I'm super excited about this because we have today a very special guest. He is a lawyer and a best-selling author of The Addicted Lawyer, The Addicted Lawyer, Tales of Bar, Booze, Blow, and Redemption. Brian Cuban, welcome. How are you?
Thanks for having me. I even showered today.
Yay! How's the working? Well, you stopped on me for a second. I thought I was frozen.
Well, we have to remember too, we may freeze a bit during this because everyone's at home in the neighborhood on their computer, so the bandwidth is sucked up, which has slowed down our internet connection substantially.
How are you holding up right now? Are you confined to home?
Yes. I mean, self-confining. Like I'm in Dallas, Texas. We're under a shelter-at-home order.
So let's start with your story. You have such an incredible story. You've been so honest about it. I love that your mission is really to help people that are battling with addiction in various forms. I personally have not experienced addiction, and I don't really have it close to home. So I will give the preemptive apology of not using the right words ahead of time. Please do. So tell us about your journey, where you started and how you got to where you are now.
Well, to understand where I am now, you have to understand the story. Because when we are in the law firm, whether it's big law, solo, medium size, and we see someone struggling, all we see is that moment. You really can't utilize the empathy that we all have the ability to use unless you understand the story to some degree. That doesn't mean you have to know their life, every bit of the life story. But if all you see is the moment, it's more sympathy than empathy. So my story begins back in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I am the middle of three boys, baby boomer, born at a time when social networking was playing kickball on the basketball court, when cell phones were two cups attached to a string.
I did that too.
Yes, before Al Gore invented the internet, right? And so I was a very shy child, and I'm a middle child, and there were the dynamics in our family were interesting. Mark, my older brother Mark, and people may know Mark from Shark Tank and the Mavs, Dallas Mavericks, and I have a younger brother Jeff. Mark, as the firstborn, was very outgoing, selling this door to door, selling that door to door. I remember when our newspaper went on strike, he and his buddies drove out to Cleveland, which is about 200 miles away, bought the Cleveland Plain Dealer, and drove back to Pittsburgh and sold them on a street corner for a profit. So you kind of knew what he was going to be, even as a teenager. My younger brother, Jeff, was a nationally ranked wrestler at the high school we went to, jock, good-looking kid, beer parties, dates, the prom, all those things. All the things that I, as a very shy middle child syndrome kid, associated with love and acceptance. And Unfortunately, I also wore everything negatively said to me in like a skin tight suit as who I was, as my self identity. I was a heavy kid trending towards obese. I also had a very difficult relationship with my mother. And I want to tell your listeners and watchers about this, but I want to make it clear to everyone that I do not blame my parents for what I went through. Parents do not cause addiction, parents do not cause eating disorders. There is a difference between cause and correlation, right? So things that happen in a home can correlate with mental health issues later in life, but it won't happen to everyone. That's why we call it correlation. And there was a lot of fat shaming in my house. My mom used to come home from work and I would be eating Chef Boyardee ravioli out of the can. I love that. Do they still have that?
Yeah.
Did eat that?
I grew up with that too. So
With the old style can opener. And my mom would come home and she sold real estate and she would see me doing that and say, if you keep eating like that, Brian, you're going to be a fat pig. And these were the things her mom said to her. And these were the things my great grandmother said to my grandmother. So fat shaming in families is often generational in nature. And she would call me a dumb bunny when I had bad grades, which was often, as her mother said to her. My mom had a very mentally abusive and verbally abusive relationship with her mother, a very difficult relationship. And these things get passed downhill. And my mom had her own psychological issues at a time when a woman talking about depression or a psychological issue, you could be put in a quote unquote asylum.
yeah,
Those
I
days.
read about those days. Oh,
Yeah, so you didn't talk about it because depression was contagious, right? And these things were contagious, so we just didn't talk about that. But as a young boy, not understanding that, and I have a wonderful relationship with my mom today, uh, I grew depressed and I began to eat more and more, and I got heavier and heavier. And as so often happens then, it happens now when kids change for what other kids perceive in the negative. The bullying started, calling me the fat pig, going telling me I had to go to Sears to get a bra for my man boobs. Kids can be cruel, right? And I mean, kids can be cruel, law students can be cruel, lawyers can be cruel. All of this came to a head one day in what I call the day of the gold pants. My brother Mark, this was the disco era. My brother Mark gave me a pair of shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. Imagine that. Have you seen Saturday Night Fever?
oh yeah.
So imagine John Travolta in his shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants up here. Imagine Brian Cuban in those same pants. Now, don't do that, right? Because those pants fit Mark really well. He wasn't a big kid. I had to jump up and down, spray the water bottle. I have no doubt my butt looked like 15 cats trying to get out when I wore those pants. But I love my brother and he loved me and they were a symbol of his love. So I wore those pants to school a lot and I stood them up the corner when I got home, didn't wash them. And the kids made fun of me, as you might expect. I was walking home from school one day with these kids. It was about a mile walk from the school to my parents' house, wearing my shiny gold bell-bottom disco pants. I'm walking home from school when they're making fun of my pants, and somehow the conversation turned to I was just too fat to wear these pants, and they looked too grotesque on me, and these kids physically assaulted me.
Oh wow.
They ripped off my shiny gold bell-bottom pants. They started pulling at them, and they tore, and then once they tore, it was like, jackals on me. And they ripped them into shreds and they threw them out in the busy street, down to my Fruit of the Loom tighty whities, my Pittsburgh Pirates t-shirt, my Keds tennis shoes, and my tube socks. They went on like they had done the funniest thing ever. I went out in the street and I picked up the shreds and I put them over my Fruit of the Loom tighty whitey private parts and waddled home. Boop, 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 boop. People gawked, no one stopped. And I got home and I went downstairs in the basement. There was no one home and I put them in the garbage, hoping that there would never be any mention of this anywhere. But of course, back then, going viral meant 15 kids in the lunchroom knew about something, right? Today would have 10 million YouTube views.
Yeah.
But it hurt the same. It hurt the same. It's a different dynamic, but it hurt the same. I was embarrassed. I was ashamed. And I didn't tell anyone about it. And I get asked often, why didn't I tell my parents? Why didn't I tell my brothers? Because I was ashamed. I felt I didn't know how to stand up to bullies. I felt I wouldn't be loved anymore. And so I kept it to myself. And it was right around then that I remember looking and seeing my reflection in the mirror and just seeing this quote unquote fat pig monster who would never be loved, never hold a girl's hand, never get his first kiss, never get married, never be part of any type of popular group. And I remember that as kind of a bright line moment in how my self identity changed into not having one, into just hating what I saw in the mirror. And if you want to know, just to circle back and say, if you want to know how traumatic that was, I could take you to that place in Pittsburgh, PA, and show you exactly where those kids did that to me today. Trauma, the body remembers trauma. It really does. It stays.
Yeah, you carried that to college.
I carried it through my life.
Yeah.
I carried it through my life. And it was more than that. And there are billions of variables in our environment as we grow up. But that was the first major trauma that I remember that stayed with me. I went on to Penn State University. My dad drove me up to Penn State, and I remember it like it was yesterday. It was a crisp, cool fall day. I'm standing in the dorm. My dad's helping me unpack. And there was this large rectangular window that looked out into the parking lot of this dorm. There were kids talking to each other. There were parents talking to each other, parents helping their kids take their luggage out of the trunk. And I make eye contact with this curly, beautiful, of course, as I remembered 40-some years later, beautiful, curly, brown-haired girl. I envisioned my entire life with this girl in 15 seconds.
Wow.
We're going to date. We're going to get married. We're going to have 2 1/2 children. She looks at her friend. She looks back at me. There's a pause. She puts her hands over her mouth like this, and she looks directly at me in the window. My dad's unpacking my stuff in the room. She said, "Ugly, ugly." Now, I am not the first kid to have nasty things said to him. It happens all the time. It happens in depositions. It happens in law school. It happens in the courtroom. It happens in high school. It happens in college. It happens in law school. We respond how we are genetically, socially, and environmentally programmed to respond. I was somebody who was already, in my mind, ugly. And I don't blame my mother. I don't blame that girl because environmental triggers are in the millions, right? If it wasn't this, it's that. But I remember at that time, as another bright line moment, thinking that my entire life was out of control. I would never be loved. I would always be ugly. What did I have control over as an 18-year-old boy? Food. That's all I had control over in my mind. But I associated eating with getting heavier and being bullied. So I decided that my road to that girl's love, to that girl's respect, to the respect of my mother, was to lose weight. So I began to restrict my food intake and restrict and restrict and restrict. And then I transitioned into binging and purging bulimia. So, and then 1979 and moving into 1980, I was a guy with an eating disorder.
And in that time, that guys, I mean, eating disorders, I remember popping up and being big in the 80s, but it was very much a female thing.
That's right.
And for men to have it, nobody understood that.
Well, nobody understood. I didn't know. You have to remember, this was 79 and 80. Do you know who Karen Carpenter is?
Yes.
Karen Carpenter passed away in 1983 from complications related to anorexia nervosa. This was before that. So I didn't know what an eating disorder was. Here's what I didn't know. It all happened just instinctively. I can't even tell you how I decided that sticking my finger down my throat was going to make me feel better. But let me tell you that it did. For 15 seconds, when I engaged in binging and purging, for those few moments, I felt this feeling of peace in my gut, this feeling of peace in my stomach, where there was only shame, that the next day everything was going to be okay. The next day I would be loved. The next day I would love myself. But of course, that 15 seconds goes away, and all of a sudden the shame swoops back in, the shame of engaging in an act that inherently feels wrong. That's not what guys do. I didn't even really know that that's what women do, but it's just not what guys do, right?
How long did that last, the anorexia and bulimia last for you?
Until my 40s.
Really?
Yes.
Did people notice it? Like maybe in the beginning stage when you were in college, did people see?
No, because if you look at the statistics, there is this stereotype that everyone who has an eating disorder has their ribs showing. People with bulimia are generally at or above normal weight. So unless they would see me doing it, they wouldn't know. And you get a PhD in hiding these behaviors. And so because the goal is for them not to know, right? So no, it's again, we have to be careful about stereotypes about what eating disorders look like.
Yeah. And I'll be guilty. I would say I'm guilty of that too. I would think that you would get so skinny that people would be like, Brian, what the hell's going on with you? But
weight is only one tiny little aspect of an eating disorder. And it depends on what the eating disorder is. There are many different types of eating disorders. There's bulimia. I also dealt with exercise bulimia, which is obsessive compulsive exercise for the primary purpose of offsetting calories. I was running up to 20 miles a day plus binging and purging, and we'll get to that. And then there's binge eating disorder, and then there are many different kinds of eating disorders. But until the opioid epidemic took hold, overdose epidemic took hold, eating disorders had the highest mortality rate of any psychological illness. I was engaging in that behavior. I was isolating. I was ashamed. And then I turned 21 and I began drinking. And before I knew it at Penn State, I was a quote unquote alcoholic. And I put alcoholic in air quotes because the actual diagnosis is alcohol use disorder. Alcoholic is a label we put on ourselves. And I'm very careful about that because it can also be a label we can use to shame people, right? He's an alcoholic. She's an alcoholic. We're generally not saying that out of the goodness of our hearts, right, when we say it. So I urge people to think about that.
What's it called again? Alcohol
use disorder.
Alcohol use disorder.
And there are several tests that can determine that. One is called the audit scale, AUDIT. But in any event, I was getting drunk almost every night. I was buying liquor at the state store in Pennsylvania. We have the state stores. And so I could get drunk just to go out and get drunker. And I was drinking alone. I was going to class hungover, sometimes going to class still drunk. I was a criminal justice major. I wanted to be a police officer. That would have worked out well, right? I'd have been the first guy in the evidence room trading out the mannitol for the blow. I wouldn't have laughed.
Am I allowed to laugh at that? I'm allowed,
absolutely,
right? Okay.
Yeah, I have to find the humor in my laughing is good. Laughing is good release. Laugh. I have to find the humor because I'm not. It's about myself. I'm not laughing at you. You're not laughing at me. You're laughing at the story.
Right, and the way that you put it, which is very interesting. So
yeah, so that's there's a big difference between finding the humor in our journey and laughing at people. So I was sitting in the placement office at Penn State, thumbing through police officer jobs, and I remember at Penn State the closest I ever came to recovery, an epiphany on recovery that I might have a problem, was walking into a hamburger joint, drunk, of course, and seeing a rack of pamphlets that the 12-step groups put out. And for those who do not know, Alcoholics Anonymous is the largest alcohol-focused 12-step group out there. There are other 12-step groups, but the most known one is AA. And it's called the 20 Questions, these pamphlets, and it was geared towards college students. You check off, do you do this? Do you miss class? Do you black out? And I'm checking off all these yes answers. And I said, I'm just a college student. Crumple it up, toss it in my tryout for the Mavs, 2 points, right in the basket. I'm now in my senior year, and I'm looking through these jobs. What am I going to do with my life? I really didn't want to go out in the real world because to go out in the real world mean I was going to have to face all of these mental health issues. And I start thinking about it. I didn't know any lawyers. I'm the first lawyer in our family. I had no real concept about what it meant to be a practicing lawyer. But here are the bells that went off. If I go to law school, I can stay in school for 3 more years, and I can binge and purge, I can drink, I can run, and I can engage in this exact same behaviors that allowed me to survive day to day at Penn State. Because I was not looking 3 years out. What will I be in 3 years out? I was looking, how will I get through the next hour? How will I get through the next moment? How will I get through the next day? And the only coping skills I had were running, binging and purging, and drinking. And so that was my world. And if I went to law school, I can continue to live in that world. That was the reason I went to law school.
So you go into law school and you carry these issues, and I don't know how to say it, but these issues with you. So in law school, you're still binging and purging,
Yes.
running, drinking. How do you manage? I mean, do people again notice how are you managing a law school? Law school's tough.
People noticed my running because I competed in our race judicata. People would see me out running, so people knew I ran, but it looked like I was just a runner, right? They didn't know about the binging and purging, and people saw me drink, but this was a different time. This was 1983 to 86 at Pitt Law. Everyone drank. This was law school was a hard drinking culture in a different way than it is today. Things have changed, but I did my first year moot court intoxicated. I had no concept of graduation, no concept of taking the bar, what that would mean, what I would do. And I graduated by the skin of my teeth. I still have reoccurring nightmares of going to graduation to get my diploma and the dean pulling it back to me going, psych, psych, you didn't graduate. You still have 100 more credits to graduate.
Well, at this time, are you thinking that you have a problem? Or is this is your normal and
that was my normal. That was my normal. Labor Day 86 with $50 to my name. I jumped on a Greyhound bus and took that bus to Dallas, Texas. Mark met me at the station and I moved in with Mark. And I wanted to go to Dallas because both Mark and Jeff, we were very close, lived there. And the only stability I saw that I could have and feel love was with my brothers. So I had no concept of being a Texas lawyer or whatever. I didn't care what I did for a living. I was just going to move to Dallas, Texas. And that's what I did in 1986.
And then what do? You eventually get back and you eventually do practice law, right?
Yes.
And what did you do when you did that?
Well, first I became when I didn't have my license, I was an insurance adjuster. My study aids when I first time I took the bar in Fort Worth, Texas, were Barbary books I had borrowed that weekend. 3.5 ounces of cocaine, which we call an 8-ball, and a liter of tab.
Wow. That
was it. That weekend. And as you might expect, I didn't pass the bar. And it's kind of funny. I remember back then you got a letter, right? Before the internet. So the letter comes and I put it on the floor and stare at it for a while. From the Texas board, and from the State Bar of Texas, and I stare at it, and I mean, I know I failed. There's no way, but I passed the Pennsylvania bar on pure luck. So I'm thinking it's kind of like that lottery ticket. Did I win? Did I win? So you rip it open, just please, come on, I won. I'm a billionaire. I won. Oh, failed, right? And I knew it, and I failed again the second time. But the second time I passed one half and didn't pass the other, so. I only had to take the one part of the bar the third time. So in 2.5 times, I managed to become a Texas licensed lawyer who was an alcoholic, alcohol use disorder, who was now dealing with cocaine addiction, who was bulimic, and who was totally unprepared for what it took to be a lawyer. And to circle back, the summer of 1987, after I'd failed the bar once, this was right when I was studying for the bar. I did my first line of cocaine in a hotel in Dallas, Texas, at the urging of someone telling me it would make me feel better about myself. And for the first time in my life, in that bathroom of that upscale hotel, wearing a suit that my dad bought me for my high school graduation, at Sears, pretending I was a lawyer in the bar upstairs, I finally loved myself after doing that line of cocaine. I finally loved myself. It was a feeling like I had never felt before. All of a sudden, the world loved Brian. Brian loved Brian. That curly brown-haired girl loved Brian. My mother loved Brian, and what she did. And so I had to have that feeling again and again and again. I began delving into on the line and unethical behavior as a lawyer.
What were you practicing? I just want to get a sense of what you were practicing at the time.
Personal injury law.
Okay. You were a plaintiff's lawyer.
Plaintiff's lawyer, if you could call it that.
Okay.
I was acting as I was engaging in something that might be called the practice of law on the most general level.
As you're going through the motions of a plaintiff's lawyer and you're practicing, do your clients know what's going on? Are you able to hide that?
Well, that's interesting. You asked that. I've done cocaine in the state courthouse bathroom. I've done cocaine in the federal courthouse bathroom. I've shown up to hearings hungover, and I'll give you an example. I got called to this was about a year before I went into recovery. I got called down to an emergency TRO meeting. Got the phone call when I had been up all night doing blow and just taken a Xanax.
Wow.
To come down. So, and I hadn't shaved, so I had to shave, and I cut myself, put on a suit. So I had to go down into this emergency TRO, and it wasn't a complete, the person who filed it was pro se. So fortunately, I was able to kind of allow the judge to just move through the mechanics for me, because it was clearly going to be denied. But I showed up under the influence of Xanax and cocaine. And it was not unusual for me to have a panic attack on the way to a courthouse. I remember I had a bench trial. I pulled over and snorted cocaine off the back of my hand. Eventually, the inability to function as a quality lawyer, because of now it wasn't even it wasn't even the Peter principle. I was just incompetent. And unethical. I was showing up. I had chiropractors that I knew. They would call me down when they had a client who had an auto accident, and I would go down there in my briefcase with contingency agreements, and they would walk out with the client. Mr. Cuban, what are you doing here? Mr. Cuban is one of our top trial lawyers. Mr. Cuban is scared to death of walking into a courtroom unless he's high. Mr. Cuban will get you your maximum settlement. Mr. Cuban will sell you down the river so he doesn't have to walk into a courtroom. He just wants your fee. Mr. Cuban will cut your fee to almost nothing, cut his fee to almost nothing so he doesn't have to walk into that courtroom. Just get him a little money to buy his cocaine and his alcohol. This is the way I function. And your readers and watchers are thinking, how does this guy still have his license? Was he suspended? Is he disbarred? No, but it wasn't for a lack of trying. And I say that tongue in cheek, but open up the back of the bar journal of any state you live in and look at the suspensions, look at the disbarments, and I guarantee you a number of those are related to drugs and alcohol.
So you never got suspended?
No, but I did get arrested. I got a DWI. That's an interesting story in itself. It was after my first of 3 failed marriages, all failing because of drugs and alcohol. I was at this bar drinking and doing cocaine. It was about 2 a.m, downtown Dallas. I get in my car and I'm tooling up the Dallas Tollway, a highway that goes straight to my house at 70 miles an hour. I pass a state trooper. I'm like, damn. And I pull off I see the exit to my house is right there. And it's just like you read. He pulls me over within walking distance to my house. And it's this older guy, probably in his late 50s, maybe early 60s, probably close to retirement as state troopers go. And I'm like any other drunk. I don't think I'm drunk. We're doing this field sobriety test. He asked me to do the alphabet backwards. And I remember Z, F, P. Touch your nose, Mr. Cuban. Is it here? Oh, there it is. See, I'm not drunk. And I said to him, are you going to take me back to my car when I blow under a 1-0? So here now I'm a lawyer and I'm going to blow because I don't think I'm drunk, right? Violating the first rule, don't blow. Violating the first rule because I don't think I'm drunk like any other drunk. I'm not a lawyer. I'm just a drunk on the side of the road who's also high on cocaine. So he takes me down there, and of course I blew a 1-1. And the feed throws me in the drunk tank, and Nothing like the feel of steel on the highway with people whizzing past you when your hands are cuffed. The case came up for trial. My lawyer, Rich Warfield. I show up. He comes out of the district attorney workroom with a piece of paper. He said, "Happy birthday early." And it was a dismissal. The state trooper decided he wasn't going to come and testify. I heard through the grapevine, I don't know that this is true, that he had retired and he had moved home to wherever, Texas, and he just wasn't coming to testify against Brian Cuban. And they needed him to prove up the breathalyzer.
Right. Was there one point? So at this point, I'm assuming you're still thinking this is your normal. There's nothing wrong that what you're doing. You don't think you have a problem.
There was, when you go through the stages there are 5 stages of recovery. There's pre-contemplation, there's contemplation, there's action. I'm not going to list them all off. But that took me from pre-contemplation to contemplation of recovery. The next morning, I called my brother and I'm crying. And said, get a good lawyer. I went into work. I was of counsel at a medium-sized law firm. And I told him what happened, thinking I'm going to get fired. All he said was, get a good lawyer. Nobody really talked about recovery. Can we help you? And I don't blame them. This was a different time. This was the early 90s. I think the Texas Lawyers Assistance Project had just come into being. We're having our 30-year anniversary coming up. So I don't even know how many lawyers knew they were around. And back then, you were either residential treatment was just starting to become a thing. So you were either in a 12-step group or residential treatment, or you weren't in recovery. There was that moment, and I said to myself, okay, I'm not going to ever do blow again. I'm not going to drink again. That lasted about 2 weeks. I started to lose all my clients because it gets around and the reputation gets around. And then in the summer of 2005, I became so despondent that I would never look in the mirror. It had nothing to do with the practice of law, that I would never look in the mirror and love myself, that I decided to end my life by suicide in the summer of 2005.
You actually made the attempt?
I did. My brothers intervened before I could make the attempt. But there was they came into my house at the urging of a friend who I sent a very disturbing email to. He didn't mind his own business. When someone is struggling, never mind your own business.
That's great advice.
And he emailed my brothers. They came in. Jeff came in first. I had a .45 automatic on my nightstand. There was cocaine on the night dresser. There was Xanax. Mark showed up later. He flew in from LA. They took the scene, took the weapon, and they took me of my first of 2 trips down to a local psychiatric hospital here in Dallas, kicking and screaming. They're trying to save my life. All I want them to do is leave me alone. They were trying to put a hold on me, and I knew that. My head's starting to clear here. So I go into intake, and I'm with the psychiatrist, the attending psychiatric nurse, and I'm with my 2 brothers crying and screaming and blaming them for everything, all of my problems. That's right, addiction, we blame everyone else. And the psychiatrist starts asking me the questions, and the lawyer kicks in, and I made sure that I verbalized that I'm not going to harm myself. I'm not a danger to others. I wasn't going to use that gun. So there was nothing they could do, right? And we have to stop here and acknowledge something. I live in privilege, but I cannot. It would be disingenuous and intellectually dishonest for me not to live it, not to acknowledge the privilege that I went through addiction in and went through recovery in. Addiction doesn't discriminate, but privilege, there are people in underserved demographics who don't have what I had, right? I have always had health insurance. I have a billionaire brother who was willing to do anything for me. And that is not about bragging or anything like that. That is about privilege.
And you had family too.
I had family.
Don't have family.
I have family who love me. There are a lot of people who are from broken families, people who are in jail, who don't talk to their parents, who don't have one parent or another. So I have to acknowledge that I exist in that continuum of privilege. But that is what it is, right?
Right.
I can't not disown from that.
But it's also on the flip side, the fact that it does happen to somebody in privilege, right?
Like you said, all of us, but we have different resources. And I had those resources if I wanted to take them, but I didn't want to take them. So we did what we called, because they couldn't admit me, we did what I called the Cuban rehab. My brothers drove me back home. They took my car keys and say, stay in your house for 2 weeks and sober up and it'll be okay. That's not how addiction works. But my family's no different than anyone else. They're trying to figure this out as they go. I had two thoughts to that. One, my drug dealer delivers, no problem. And two, now they know. Now they really know. My recovery tipping point, and I don't use rock bottom because I do not believe we have to experience the worst of addiction to recover. The goal is to recover at the highest level possible, not wait till the worst to happen. So I don't like rock bottom. My recovery tipping point was Easter weekend 2007. I had a 2-day drug and alcohol induced blackout. My girlfriend at the time, now my wife, who had just moved in, came home to find me in bed. 2 days had passed. She took me back to Green Oaks Hospital. And standing in the parking lots of Green Oaks waiting for check-in, 3 things occurred to me. 1, there wouldn't be a third trip. I'd be dead. 2, she was going to leave. I'd leave, right? She didn't. She stood by me, and we dated for over a decade while I built the trust that I had broken, rebuilt that trust, found recovery, and we have now been married over 3.5 years. So not all relationships will survive that, but ours did. But it did because I had to recover for me. Not for her, not for my family, not for my brother, because people do leave. Parents die, we experience trauma, our pets die, and recovery has to survive all of that, right? The next day, I walked into my psychiatrist's office, who I've been lying to. Why would you lie to a psychiatrist? Well, shame knows no hourly rate. I was ashamed of all the things I was going through. And at that point, I knew I had an eating disorder. And we started talking, and he said, Brian, well, we have a lot of things to get to. We have to really talk about that little boy and your story, and we have to heal the story. But we can't heal the story until you find sobriety. And at that time, all my psychiatrist knew was 12-step and treatment. There are many paths to recovery. There's medication-assisted treatment, there's refuge recovery, there's smart recovery. I could name countless paths to recovery that aren't 12-step. But for me, it had to be 12-step because abstinence had to be my pathway, because there was no such thing as one line of cocaine, and there was no such thing as one drink without one line of cocaine, and it was never just one. So he said, would you consider residential treatment? And I said, no, I'm too busy. I had no clients, but I'm too busy. I can't go to 12-step because people smoke outside. I see them out there, and secondhand smoke will kill you. Right?
I love the logic and the thought process.
Yeah, but that's addiction. That's addiction. And so I did decide to go to 12-step, not because I thought I was a quote unquote alcoholic. I decided to go to 12-step, 1, to show my family that I was doing something because I didn't want to lose them. And they love me dearly, but family's distance. And there was another reason that had nothing to do with drinking. If sitting in that room for 1 day would allow me to wake up the next morning, walk to the mirror in my bathroom, stark naked bathing suit, birthday suit, and look in that mirror and love myself for the first time in my life, without cocaine, without alcohol, without having to binge and purge. If sitting in that room would allow me that one moment in my life, that next morning, I would sit in that room.
Are you there now? Are you there at a point where you can sit in your room and love who you are and look at yourself and love you?
I'm a work in progress. I'm still in therapy. I mean, I go through, self-image is a funny thing, especially I also deal with body dysmorphic disorder, which is another conversation. But self-image is a funny thing. It's because that little boy, that for me to repair my self-image, I have to repair that little boy. I have to let that little Brian know that he was loved, that his mother did love him, that nothing that happened was his fault. And that's a process, right? That is a process. And it's an uncomfortable process. Who wants to tear back all the layers of their life to talk to their teenage self, their tween self? And it was a little boy, a hurt little boy that I dragged around on this tire, on a chain, on a gravel road my entire life without ever telling him that he was loved. Yeah. And so I spent a lot of time in therapy working on that and making sure that I stay on the beam, that I don't let COVID-19 send me over into an unhealthy thought process, that I don't let whatever trauma of my past. And I've been through many different types of therapy: acceptance and commitment therapy, cognitive behavioral therapy, talk therapy, role playing therapy. And all of these things, I am still in therapy today. I still deal with depression. Depression and addiction can exist independently, and they do for me. And so I wake up every day trying to heal myself a little more.
How long have you been sober? I don't know if that's the right word, as far as no.
I've been in long-term recovery for, I'll have 13 years April 8th.
Well, congratulations. That's
Thank you.
amazing.
Thank you.
And I assume this is like the therapy, it's something that you have to continually work on as well.
Absolutely. I talk to my therapist every week.
So let's talk about lawyers that are, or even claims adjusters. I mean, you were a claims adjuster at one point. I'm sure it's in that profession as well. What do you say to them if they're going through this? Is there anything that either a family member or their partner or a law firm leader can do to help? Like, it seems like it has to be something internal.
One of the biggest problems we have right now in terms of wellness in the legal profession is a vertical issue, because the ABA, are you familiar with the ABA Wellness Pledge and all the things that are going on? See, there you go. This is one of our issues.
Yeah.
So the ABA has done a lot with, they have a wellness pledge out there. They put out all kinds of toolkits, and there's a lot more wellness awareness within the big law structure. Okay? That's great, because big law has the money. I've spoken at countless big law firms. I go in and tell my story, and they simulcast it to all other offices. And so they're getting it, and they sign this pledge to do these different things. I had lunch with a buddy of mine. Now it's going on 2 months ago. And he is a partner at a mid-sized firm here in Dallas. And we got together, and he's a great guy, and he started asking what's going on. I asked him about what his thoughts are on the wellness initiatives. He had never heard of the ABA Wellness Initiative. He had never heard of the ABA Betty Ford Hazelton study. Are you aware of that?
No.
Okay,
That's why I'm talking to you.
those statistics. That study found that about 20 to 21% of all lawyers, it was about 15,000 people, would be classified as problem drinkers, quote unquote, alcoholic. We have a depression rate, I think it was about 28%, a high anxiety rate. We have the fourth highest suicide rate of white collar professions. That is why this is such an important conversation. And to put that in context, I read an article on CNN, again, this was a while ago, where they talked about, I guess it was 11.5 or 12%, and don't hold me to this, you'd have to go look, of Americans being classified as quote unquote alcoholics. They called it a crisis, the alcohol crisis. 11.5%, 20%. If that's a crisis, what are we?
Yeah.
And if you go into the millennial demographic, and I just use millennial because I don't know what the age range was. If you go into the millennial demographic, it's over 30% problem drinkers, 1 and 3. We are a profession in crisis from a mental health standpoint. What are we going to do about it? So, talking to this lawyer, he hadn't heard of the study. He hadn't really heard of what the ABA was doing. I said, "Do you care about this?" He said, "Well, let me tell you something, Brian. Here's what I care about. I care about providing excellent service to our clients. I care about my family. I care about a couple other things. None of them were wellness in the profession. If a lawyer comes to me and he is struggling, if one of my associates comes to me and he or she is struggling, it is on that person to get help. It is not my job to be their wellness coach," is the way he put it.
Yeah.
We have no wellness initiatives in place. We have never talked to it. I have no plans to do that. And if that lawyer does not want to do that, we will find an associate to replace him.
That's a larger problem. Like, if you don't think that is, as a law firm leader, if you don't think that is something you need to deal with, that's a problem.
That is a problem, and it's a systemic problem.
Yes.
Now, again, I'm not, big law is big law. There may be people in big law who feel that way, but they're not going to say it, right? No one's going to say that. But you get below big law where the majority of the legal profession exists. And we have a huge problem because this message is either not filtering down, it's not being sold properly, it's not being context properly, or they just don't care. And you have the ABA and you have local bars putting on the wellness programs. I'm on the Texas Lawyers Assistance Program committee, and we do all kinds of initiatives.
Well, talk to me, because I'll be honest to say, I love my employees. If one of them came into my office and told me they had a problem like this or anything related to this, I wouldn't know how to deal with it. Like, I would want to help, but I wouldn't know the first clue on what to do or what I should do or how to help them.
Okay.
What would you say to me?
What I would say to you is start at the low-hanging fruit. You don't have to get your master's in counseling. Start at the lowest hanging fruit. Go to the webpage of your lawyer's assistance program and memorize everything they offer and that phone number, and make sure you are getting that information out to the people you work with. That is the easiest thing you can do because it is already there for you, right? And in the time it took us, and I'm glad we're doing this, I'm just going to use this as an example, and in the time it took us to do this podcast, you could have learned everything you know there is to know about the Lawyer's Assistance Program in your state. That's the easiest thing you can do. So let's just start there. Let's not make it complicated. You can be completely anonymous as you want to be. It is not going to get out. It's funny, I talked to the Dallas Bar a few years ago, and I talked about the Lawyer's Assistance Program here. And afterwards, a seasoned trial lawyer came up to me and said, Brian, I know what you're talking about, but it's not confidential. If you go to the Lawyer's Assistance Program, it's going to get to the state bar, and it won't. Blah, blah, blah. Unless you wanted to. And then you're in big trouble. You're going to lose clients. You're going to lose this. You're going to lose that. Well, how do you know that? Another lawyer told me. Well, how did he know that? Well, I think a lawyer may have told him who tried to use it. So you're a seasoned trial lawyer coming to me with a guy told a guy who told a guy. That is the very definition of stigma. Use your lawyer's assistance program. Learn the resources. Start there. It is the lowest hanging fruit there is. Now, we step above that. We have to create compassionate communities within the profession. In the macro, we have the legal profession. We're all part of a community in the legal profession. We have people trying to create compassionate communities. And what is a compassionate community? In the most simplest terms, it is a community where we become uncomfortable when we see someone struggling. And instead I say this tongue-in-cheek because we're in the middle of COVID-19, instead of distancing because we are uncomfortable, we close distance. And not necessarily close distance to within 6 feet if it's happening now.
Not physically.
Close distance emotionally and empathetically by understanding that there is a story. Because if we understand that there is a story there, it is not just sympathy, it is empathy. And when we connect on an empathetic level, that is a core of compassionate community. And compassionate communities exist again at the macro, but it can exist within practice groups, it can exist within solos, it can exist within all kinds of different sub-communities, right? Where we are uncomfortable when we see someone struggling or if we know someone's struggling. And instead of shying away, instead of getting comfortable in our comfort zone, change the paradigm of the comfort zone. That is a compassionate community. And there is so much out there written about compassionate communities, and we need to work more at that in the legal profession.
So let's dive a little bit into that then. And we're going to go long, so I apologize. I hope you don't have to be anywhere. Okay. So if you see somebody that you think is struggling, do you say something? Or because we all have that mindset, like we shouldn't get into somebody else's business. Like,
of course we are. And it's how you say it, right? You don't accuse, you don't judge, you don't say, man, you look like you're drunk today. You look like, man, buck it up. You're depressed, buck it up. 5 words. You want to know how to become a part of a compassionate community without reading one thing? With 5 words. How are you doing today? You are now part of a compassionate community. And before that interaction breaks, ask them again. Let them know that, hey, if you want to talk, I may not be the expert in psychology, but I'm here. I'm an ear. I'm an empathetic ear. And I'm not going to judge you for talking, and I'm not going to blab it for talking. But we can talk our way to a path. And I'm happy to help you talk your way to a path of recovery, a path of balance, a path of feeling better. And that is right there, just the 2 ask rule. And maybe they're not ready. Maybe you're afraid they're going to say, mind your own business. I've never had that happen. But maybe they'll just say, thank you, I'm fine. But here's what you've done. You have become a compassionate community cog in a continuum where if we all practice this, it may not be the next person who says, how are you doing? It may be the 3rd person or the 4th person. When the struggling person finally says, you know what, I'm not doing okay. Thank you for asking. So you have become a compassionate community cog in a chain where you may not even know the impact you had.
So, but what happened? All right. So I do the 2 ask, and maybe somebody else down the road does the 3 and 4 or 5th ask. What do you say to the lawyer that says, I can't answer that question honestly, because if I do, I'm going to get fired, or my partner's going to fire me, my client's going to fire me. How do I answer that honestly?
Through continuing messaging. You can't make someone do it. It's just like addiction. It's through messaging. And this is what Big Law has become very good at with the Wellness Pledge. These things don't happen overnight. The guy who said to me, it's not confidential, right? Despite with triple hearsay, isn't just going to, because I say it's confidential, isn't going to just say, oh, okay, Brian. It's through messaging. Let them know again and again and again. And obviously there's a line where if you see conduct, that's a different story, right? I'm not talking about where our ethical obligations kick in, because that's going to be specific to your situation. But I know people who have pulled lawyers aside in the courtroom and say, look, I see this. I don't know if the judge sees this, but just want to let you know that I see it and I'm here for you if you want to talk about this before all of a sudden it's on the record. And so that's part of a compassionate community too. So it's going to depend on the situation. But you're not just, because you say that person, maybe you're the 4th cog in the wheel, right? And the continuum, and they say it. Okay, yes, you're right. There's no magic pill to this, but it is messaging. Empathy. Voice. Using your voice of empathy and compassion. And the more we do that, the more the message takes hold. Storytelling. People need to tell their stories if they're willing. I go into law firms, bar associations, recovery events, and I just tell my story because that's the empathetic connection.
So let me pivot just a side note to that, and then I want to come back to sort of wrapping this up. The legal profession, traditionally very stressful. Do you think it's a profession with that in mind that lawyers in recovery can excel at? Or is the stress something that, I don't want to say you can't manage, but how do you speak to that? Is the law profession something that's healthy for these lawyers?
That's kind of a loaded question, because if you were dealing with a mental health issue and you were not dealing with it in a health, if you have a mental health issue going into the profession, or develop one in the profession, or you have family, whatever this situation is, some trauma happens, family stress, divorce, and you're not dealing with it, then the stress is going to be a trigger, right? But if you go into it with a healthy recovery plan, you put one together, of course you can excel like anyone else. I was very irritated when I think it was the mid-year state bar meeting, and what's his name, Carlson, and he's a great guy. He put out a quote that said, "An unhealthy lawyer talking about mental health is an unethical lawyer." That is not true. That just irritated me. And a mentally unhealthy lawyer can be unethical, can turn into unethical conduct, right? In state bar conduct, the state bar will have to address. But that is not true, because people deal with, it's stigmatizing. We have lawyers dealing with bipolar disorder. We have lawyers dealing with addiction. We have lawyers dealing with depression. We have lawyers dealing with all kinds of different things. That doesn't make them, we have lawyers that just get sick, right? When we have cognitive issues as my generation ages. The baby boomers in the practice, a whole other conversation. But to say something like that just really chafed me, because that is not true. An unhealthy lawyer can become an unethical lawyer. So let's get healthy. But it is not cause. There is there is cause and there's correlation, right? He stated it as cause. And that is just not true. Yes, you can excel, but to excel, we have to take care of ourselves. And that has across the continuum, that has relevance.
So I know we touched on this briefly. How are you doing today? What does your normal look like? Are you happy? I don't know if this is the right word.
No,
Are you happy?
I struggle with depression, and this is a challenging time for me because, like anyone else struggling with major depression, you deal with it. I wake up some days and what's the point? And I deal with it, and I have coping skills. I have a wonderful wife. I have wonderful brothers that I can talk to. I take my medication daily. I'm working on my third book. I'm going to start doing a Zoom chat weekly. So I'm trying to do all the things that define my passions, instead of percolating in isolation. Because there is a difference between enjoying solitude and being forced into isolation. I'm an introvert and I enjoy solitude sometimes. Because I see this meme going around, well, I'm an introvert, so this was normal for me. I don't view it as the same, right? When the choice is taken away from you, at least to me, it's different. And that has its own stress in itself. And that stress in itself can trigger underlying mental health issues. So I have to be very careful. I try to stay in a routine. I make sure and it seems so simple, but I make sure I shave every morning. I make sure I shower to stay in some semblance of routine.
So two final things I want to talk about. How is the relationship with your family?
Great.
Your parents, your brother. I mean, do you guys, that's a lot for them to go through as well. How is that now?
Well, I mean, I see Mark in the news every day doing his thing, and he has 3 children and he does the things he does. We text every morning, Mark, Jeff, and I, just a text that says, what are you doing today? We are very close. And you want to know how close we are? We live walking distance from each other.
That's great.
And that's not metaphorical. We live walking distance. And until my father passed away a year and a half ago, he lived across the street from me. That is the family that our father instilled in us, the bond of family. Our mother lives in Pittsburgh. So, of course, like anyone else, we worry about her because she's independent. And so we're always trying to make sure she has what she needs and is not venturing out, right, and keeping her isolation. We have our family challenges. My wife has her family challenges. We all have them. We're no different than anyone else. We have our parents who are aging, and we worry about them in this stressful time. And we worry about each other, but we stay connected. That has relevance. It is exponentially more relevant in today's environment, but it's relevant across the board. Connection.
So last question is, what would you say to the lawyer listening that is maybe dealing with addiction or an eating disorder or alcohol use disorder, whatever issue they're dealing with? What would you say to them?
I'd say to them that recovery is possible. Connection is there. You just may not be seeing it because you're unable to step back from where you are. And that's understandable when you're in the middle of it. And when your entire world is that, reach out. Reach out to your lawyer's assistance program. Reach out to other lawyers in recovery. Reach out to me. I'll give you all the resources in the world for reach out. And just as importantly, when you see that person, reach out. Don't mind your own business. They may not want to hear from you. That's okay. They may not take your call. Text them. They may not answer the text. Email them. Just let them know. Just knowing that somebody is thinking about you has a huge therapeutic effect.
That is great advice. I so appreciate you coming on today. Before we started recording, I said to you, like, when I first saw you on LinkedIn, and what you were doing smacked me in the face, because we don't see lawyers talking about that as openly and bluntly and candidly as you do. And I know you said, look, I don't have as much to lose doing it, but I still think the fact that you're talking about it, you're one of the more prominent people I've seen talking about it. So I think massive kudos to you
Well,
on
thank you.
that. Where can people find you? You said you're writing a book. What's the book on?
Now, this one, my first two were nonfiction memoirs. This one's fiction. It's called The Ambulance Chaser.
Okay, awesome. When's it coming
About
out?
it's about a Pittsburgh lawyer who gets himself in a little trouble and has to go on the run to prove his innocence. I'm finishing up the first draft manuscript as we speak. So probably first quarter of next year.
All right. Where can people find you if they want to talk to you about these issues?
You can just email me, Brian with an I, at briancuban.com. And my website is www.briancuban.com. And I'm bcuban at Twitter, BCUBAN, and I'm on LinkedIn.
Awesome. Thank you so much. I appreciate it. All right. Well, everybody, thank you. If you have questions for Brian, shoot him your questions at those addresses. And join me next time on the next episode of The Defense Never Rests. See you then.